My name is Chris Sprigman. I'm a professor at the University of Virginia School of Law, and I've co-authored a book called The Knockoff Economy: How Imitation Sparks Innovation. There's a theory that underlies intellectual property law in the United States. If you don't have some legal rule that stops people from copying, who's going to create? Because copyists will take what people create, copy it cheap, and sell it for a price that will undercut the ability of the author, the originator, to make any kind of money off of his or her creativity. And if you think about it, it sounds really good. It sounds completely sensible. The problem is when you look out into the world, the theory doesn't always hold. In some instances, copying actually spurs innovation. It actually helps it. And what we wanted to do was, leave this theory aside for the moment, look at the law, look at the world, and see how it actually works. And what we find is often, and in fact in some very important, lucrative, creative industries, the theory doesn't seem to hold. Cal and I started by looking at the fashion industry. Fashion designs have never been covered by intellectual property law in the United States. You get lots of copying, but you get lots of innovation. People buy clothes to stay in style. And so copying sends a signal that there's a trend. People buy into the trend. In a sense, copying helps set trends, and trends help sell fashion. People don't think of football as a creative industry, but football is a creative industry. Football is a sport in which there's been lots and lots of innovation. There's been offensive innovations and then defensive counter-innovations. So you get, for example, the West Coast offense, which was an innovation that happened in the 70s and 80s, and defensive counter-strategy, the zone blitz. And this is a continuing cycle of innovation and counter-innovation in football, none of it protected by copyright or patent. So what incentivizes football coaches to do this, even though they know they can, and if the innovations are successful, they will be copied? Innovation pays if the innovative advantage lasts even a short period of time. And in football it does, in part because although it's easy to see that your opposing team is doing something different, and it may even be pretty easy to figure out what it is, it's often hard to implement it. Apple just sued Samsung for being a copyist. But if you look back to 1979, when Apple was getting started, one of the seminal events in Apple's history is Steve Jobs, a young Steve Jobs, visiting Xerox's lab in Palo Alto, the Palo Alto Research Center. And at that lab, he sees a prototype Xerox computer that's running a very neat-looking graphical user interface and is controlled in part using something called a mouse. And Steve Jobs looks at the graphical user interface and he looks at the mouse and he's like, my God, that is really awesome. And he takes a bunch of those ideas and he implemented it, and we eventually got the Macintosh, right? So the most valuable company in the world, Apple, is built on tweaking. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's the way the world works. But our intellectual property system sacrifices the interests of the tweakers to the interests of the pioneers. It incentivizes pioneers to innovate, but it makes it harder for tweakers to do their work.